All right, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Very good. My name is John Luce. I am the police chief here in St. Louis Park. I am certainly no expert on coyotes, but we are fortunate that we do have an expert here tonight. I would just offer you a quick backdrop to this presentation. My view is that although coyotes have probably been here for a long time, and our expert can talk to you about that, it seems to me and to many of you that in the last few years, the contact we've been having with coyotes has been increasing, and the behavior of coyotes has become more aggressive, and it's become difficult for us to know quite what to tell you about what to do and what not to do, and we finally reached a point where we just felt like the best thing we could do was to bring somebody here who understands coyotes and really can give you some good information about the presence of coyotes in the community and what you should and should not do to help make this work better for us. We've had a few incidents in St. Louis Park. Some of you may know that, involving people's pets, and in one case, a 12-year-old boy. So there's certainly a legitimate reason to be concerned. But I heard our speaker earlier today, and she's terrific. And I hope that if you can listen and take this in and ask your good questions when she's done, we can leave here feeling a little more comfortable with the fact that they may be here, but there's a way for us to cope and deal and exist differently. And some of the things that have been happening, there appears to be strategies we can put in place through some education and training that's going to make this better for us. So I want to give you a quick bio on our speaker. When I get done, I'd ask you to give her a nice warm welcome. She came here from Washington, D.C. Against the odds of some fairly inclement weather, as you know, moving that direction. So she's traveled a long way to train not only the police department employees and some other city staff employees this morning at 10 o'clock, but then to be here again tonight to speak with all of you and then answer your questions. So our speaker is Lynsey White Dasher. This is a nicely summarized resume for her. As Suburban Wildlife Specialist for the Humane Society of the United States, Lynsey helps urban and suburban communities across the country find effective and humane solutions to human-wildlife conflicts with species including coyotes, Canada geese, white-tailed deer, and bears. Her experience with coyotes includes completing research and data analysis for the Cook County Coyote Project in Chicago, Illinois, the largest study of urban coyotes in the country. She has also published an analysis of coyote attacks on people throughout the U.S. and Canada. Prior to her work with coyotes, Lynsey completed research on human-wolf conflicts for Defenders of Wildlife, the International Human-Wildlife Conflicts for the Bushmeat Crisis Task Force. Lynsey obtained a Master of Science degree in the Conservation Biology and Sustainable Development from the University of Maryland in 2006 and a Bachelor of Science degree in Zoology from the Ohio State University in 2002. Lynsey has led coyote hazing training workshops for animal control officers representing more than 130 communities throughout the United States. Please join me in welcoming Lynsey White Dasher.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out this evening. I'm happy to be here to talk to you about living with coyotes here in St. Louis Park. So before I get started, I just wanted to see, by a show of hands, how many of you have seen a coyote in your neighborhood or in a park? Wow. Okay. Almost all of you. How many of you have heard a coyote howling? Maybe in your neighborhood? A couple of you. And how many of you are here because you're concerned about your pets or maybe your children or your grandchildren, or you have other concerns about coyotes? Okay, so I'll talk about all of that tonight. What I'm going to cover is, first I'll give a background on coyote ecology and behavior. Then I'll talk about, why do we have coyotes here in St. Louis Park. I'll talk about how to solve coyote conflicts, how to prevent them from happening in the first place, but then also how to solve any conflicts that we have going on. And then I'll just give some general tips for coexistence. And after that, I'll have time for any questions that you have. If you have a question as I'm going through, feel free to ask that. But we do ask, since we're recording this, that you either go to the podium in the back to ask your question, or raise your hand, and then the chief can come over to you with the microphone. Okay, so I always like to start with a background of coyote ecology and behavior. Some of you might already know a lot about coyotes. You might have done research, or you might already know about them on your own. But I always like to do this because I want all of us to have a basic understanding of how coyotes live and what they do. Because if we want to change the problematic behavior of coyotes, we have to understand why they're doing what they're doing in the first place. So when you look at a coyote, and a lot of you have looked at a coyote, you probably notice a few things. And a lot of it comes from how they are actually, where they came from. They're actually native to the central grasslands of North America. And so they have these nice long legs that allow them to run through the tall grass, searching for their prey, which typically are rodents. So unlike wolves, coyotes don't hunt in packs. They usually hunt on their own or maybe in a pair, again, because they're hunting very small prey, not something that they want to share with another coyote. So those long legs make them look a lot bigger than they are. Coyotes, especially here in this area, are typically only 25 to 35 pounds, so similar to perhaps a medium-sized dog. But they look a lot bigger than that because they have those long legs and the big bushy coat, especially this time of year. Those legs also allow them to run really, really fast. They are, depending on who you ask, the second or the third fastest land mammal in North America. The only ones faster are the pronghorn antelope, or in some records, the mountain lion. So very, very fast. But what's even more unique and remarkable about them is just how incredibly smart they are. Those of you that have seen the Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner cartoons, or your kids have watched those, those are completely fictitious. A real coyote would never fall for those Acme products, especially time and time again. They would be much smarter than that. They wouldn't fall for those tricks. Coyotes are actually very smart, and they learn very, very quickly. And they use that, for the most part, to learn how to avoid us and to blend into our urban and suburban areas. They learn how to cross traffic. We've seen them crossing 3-4 lane highways with their pups. They learn how to stay out of our way most of the time. So, they're actually very, very smart, and they're very adaptable, and they can live just about anywhere. So in terms of, looking at what coyotes eat, a lot of people are surprised to know that they're omnivores. They're opportunistic omnivores. They're not true carnivores. And really, they will eat just about anything. So again, the majority of what they're eating are small rodents, so they're actually doing us a favor in that regard by providing free pest control in our neighborhoods, keeping down the population of mice and rats. They also eat other small mammals. They sometimes will eat white-tailed deer fawn. They help keep the population of deer down. Sometimes we think that there are too many deer in certain areas. Also Canada geese. Some places I know around here have abundant populations of Canada geese. They've found to be a primary predator of Canada goose eggs, and also some other small mammals. But a lot of people are surprised to learn that fruit also makes up a lot of their diet. So these numbers here are from that study in the Chicago area, the Cook County Coyote Project. And this particular study showed that about a fourth of their diet involved fruit. But other studies, especially in more southern parts of the United States, have shown that up to half of their diet is made up of fruit. So they're eating a lot of fruit, even eating some grass and insects. I want to point out that, again, these coyotes are living in Chicago. So they're living amongst a lot of people and a lot of pets. And even still, only 2% of their diet was human-associated food. And that would include things like pet food, garbage, food scraps, that kind of thing. And only 1% of the coyotes in this study were found to have eaten a pet, and that was a domestic cat. So, any time that a coyote attacks a pet, it's very unfortunate. We love our pets. They're like our family. But it always blows up in the media, and we hear about it. But by and large, most coyotes are not doing that sort of thing. They're not bothering pets. They're eating these natural sources of food and actually doing us a favor by doing that. Okay, so in terms of the social structure of coyotes, there are two basic types of coyotes. There are the resident groups, which are what we most typically think of. Pretty similar to wolves. They live in family groups with just one dominant breeding pair, and then some other often related individuals. They're often younger females that are related. And then they'll also have the pups from that year. So in these groups, they will defend their territory from other coyote family groups. So those of you that have heard coyotes howling, that's what they're doing. They howl to communicate with their pups or to their other family members to let them know where they are, or they howl to tell other coyote family groups that this is their territory and, they need to stay away. So sometimes I hear people contacting me because they're concerned that they hear coyotes howling and they think that it means that the coyotes are celebrating a kill, but that's not what's happening. They don't hunt in packs, so when they're howling, they're just communicating with each other. So then we also have what we call transient coyotes. These are coyotes that are either solitary coyotes or it could be a mated pair. And because they don't have that strength in numbers, they aren't able to defend their territory from other coyote family groups. So because of that, they have these much larger home ranges that are overlapping with other coyotes. And essentially what they're doing is just waiting for the next place to open up so they can move in and establish their own family group. So they're always out there looking for empty home ranges that they can move into. Another neat fact about coyotes is that unlike most mammals, they actually are monogamous. Dr. Stan Garrett, who is the head of that coyote project in Chicago, often says that he's never documented a case of divorce amongst coyotes in the wild. They do stay together. We actually have a lot of DNA research from a lot of these radio-collared coyotes, and we find that they stay together. They don't seem to cheat on each other like a lot of mammals do. And we think that's because it's so important that both the male and the female help raise the pups. They both help raise the pups, and that's really important to the pup's survival. So in terms of seasons, there are a few different biological seasons for coyotes. And right now we're in the mating season. So mating season, of course, is when the coyotes are breeding with each other. Again, that's only one pair per family group. And sometimes during this time of year, they can get a little bit more territorial. Kind of like a guy in a bar, they get very territorial of their mate, and if they see a larger dog, if they see an off-leash large dog coming into their territory, they might view that as a threat to their mate. So sometimes we see conflicts. It's pretty rare that coyotes attack large breed dogs, but when it happens, it's usually this time of year, and it's usually an off-leash dog that they view as a threat. Then we have pup rearing season. That is May through August. That, of course, is when the pups are born. Typically 4 to 7 per litter. Again, just one group of pups in the family group, and the other related coyotes often help raising and feeding the pups. This is the only time of year that coyotes actually use a den. So the rest of the year, they're not going back to a certain place and sleeping every night. They're not using dens. They actually just sleep under some cover, and where they sleep can vary, depending on what day it is. They move around. They're much more mobile within their home range. But this time of year, when they have pups, they plop their pups in the den for about 4 to 6 weeks before they start learning to hunt, and so they're much more centralized around where those dens are. So sometimes we'll see conflicts around denning sites. Unlike some mammals like bears or other mammals, coyotes are actually not very defensive about their dens. If, for instance, they know that there's a lot of human activity around a den, they're much more likely to move their pups somewhere else. So it's actually fairly easy to get coyotes to move their den. If, for instance, you have a den in your backyard or in your neighborhood, and you can't, the best thing to do is just to tolerate it, because they'll only be there a couple months. If you have a dog, you could walk them a different way. But if not, there are ways you can encourage coyotes to move their den. And the best way is just to, when the parents are gone, put some human-scented items near the denning site. So items that seem to work well are, if you go on a jog and you go to the gym and you have your sweaty workout clothes, putting those near the denning site seem to work really well. For some reason, used kitty litter works really well. This works for foxes too. Sometimes we do see conflicts if people have small pets that are running around outside unattended, meaning that they're not on a leash or someone's not outside with them. Coyotes are looking to feed their pups. They need more food during this time of year. If they see small pets running around unattended near their den, they may view that as a prey source to feed their pups. So sometimes we see conflicts there. So again, females often move their pups multiple times throughout the season. They always have different denning sites in mind, so they know where to go if they feel threatened. So then by the end of the summer, the pups have learned how to hunt. They're going out. They'll stay with their parents for that year, but they might go out and hunt on their own. And then dispersal season is the last season during the fall. This is when the pups from the year before, the male yearling pups, from the year before, get kicked out of the group. They go and become those transient coyotes, those ones that are solitary on their own looking for a new home range. So we often don't see many conflicts during this time of year, but when we do, it's often with those young males. They're not that great at hunting yet, and if someone is leaving pet food outside, for instance, and it's an easy meal for them, they might take advantage of it. So sometimes we'll see that. Okay, so in terms of where coyotes live, they are so flexible that they can live just about anywhere. When they started this project in Chicago, they sort of expected to find most of the coyotes that were radio collared. They expected to find most of their movements in the large forest preserve areas. But they actually found them everywhere. They found them right next to housing developments, right next to shopping malls, other commercial sites, right next to highway embankments. They were just everywhere. And most of the time, people had absolutely no idea that they were there. My work on the Cook County Coyote Project was actually, people hear that I worked on that and they think it sounds very exciting that I was out there tracking coyotes. I had the very boring job of sitting at a desk in Columbus, Ohio, analyzing GIS data like a nerd. I didn't have any exciting parts except for one trip that I got to make to Chicago where I rode around in the truck that was tracking the radio collared coyotes. So we knew exactly where they were. We zoomed into their location. We followed them. We tracked, I think, 4 or 5 that evening. I did not see a single coyote. We knew exactly where they were. We were within 10, 20 feet of them. They were on the other side of that construction pile, on the other side of that bush. Actually fell asleep at one point, which was embarrassing. I did not see a single coyote the whole night. And that's just because they're so secretive that they go out of their way to avoid us so much. We also found that within their home ranges, they will spend the majority of their time in these little patches of natural areas. So, in the Chicago area, we found coyotes that had home ranges that were very, very urbanized. Most of their home range was very densely populated with people, but they would have just, let's say, 10 or 20% of their home range would be natural patches of land. But we didn't find that they were only spending 10 or 20% of their time in those natural parts. We found they were spending most of their time in those natural patches. So again, they were going out of their way to avoid people. So how many of you have seen this picture before? One person. Okay, so this is a Quiznos sub shop, the Snapple Cooler, and this was in the middle of downtown Chicago, the very most downtown part of Chicago. This was a Quiznos, and they had the door open. It was a warmer spring day, and they had the door open to let a breeze in. And this coyote just wandered into the Quiznos. He tried to jump over the counter. He didn't quite make it, and he settled into the Snapple Cooler. And he just sat like this for, I think, 10 to 15 minutes. Not sure what he was doing or why he was there. And some people continued eating their sandwiches while this was going on, and taking pictures. And finally, animal control came and got the coyote and took him away. But of course, this was a huge story, in the 5 o'clock news, and there were news reporters all over interviewing people that were in the shop, asking them what they thought about this. And what I find the most interesting about this story is not just that it happened, and it makes a great story and great pictures, but it was the public's reaction to it. So, person after person that got interviewed kept saying, well, what in the world is a coyote doing here in downtown Chicago? And the truth is there are a lot of coyotes in downtown Chicago. When they look at the traffic cams at night, in the middle of the night, they see coyotes crossing the roads in downtown Chicago all the time. But they're just not out there doing this kind of thing. So people don't know that they're there. All right, so why do we have coyotes here in St. Louis Park? Well, number one, there's plenty of places for them to live. As I mentioned, they can live just about anywhere. But even more importantly, there's plenty of food. And when I mean plenty of food, I don't mean our dogs and our cats. So, a common concern I get from people is that they've learned that coyotes have come into their neighborhood and they think it's because they've run out of food, there's less rabbits this year, or something has happened and they've come into their neighborhood to eat their pets. But that's not what's going on. They're coming in to eat the mice and the rats and all the other great mammals that we have in our urban and suburban areas. There's plenty of sources of food for them here without ever bothering our pets. But another huge thing is that they don't have any competition here. You know, we don't really have any wolves or bears or mountain lions in our cities. So they are literally the top dog, and they love it. You know, this is great for them. It's what, you know, urban and suburban areas are great places for coyotes to live. So there's plenty of sources of food for them, but don't get me wrong, as I mentioned, they're very smart. They're going to eat whatever is easiest to eat. So if there are easy, free sources of food for them lying around and nothing bad happens to them, when they eat it, then they're going to eat it. So the biggest attractant for coyotes is pet food. People that leave pet food outside, it's an easy source of calories, nice and fattening. Coyotes love it. They're going to come eat it if it's available. Unsecured garbage cans, bird feeders. They're not attracted to the bird seed, but if you have one of those and the squirrels get on it and all the seed falls on the ground, they're not attracted to the seed, but they're attracted to the rodents that come feed on the seed. Again, fruit, as I mentioned, is a huge one. If it falls on the ground and starts fermenting, that attracts them. Gardens and compost piles, especially if the compost pile has meat in it or dairy, that's an attractant. I'll talk more about this in a moment, but unattended small pets, that's an attractant. But of course, the ultimate is intentional feeding. So you never want to hand feed a coyote, most importantly, even if they look like they're friendly. I know they look a lot like a dog, but you definitely don't want to do that. But also, you know, you might be leaving food outside, for instance, for raccoons or for maybe feral cats or something else, but coyotes don't care who you left it out there for. You know, if they see the food, they're going to come eat it. So this is the most important thing that we don't want to do because it most easily leads to conflicts with coyotes. Okay, so I want to talk about the different types of conflicts now and why they happen and how we can prevent them. So probably most of you at this point have experienced just seeing a coyote, and you might have been concerned about it because especially if it was during the daytime, you might have thought that it was rabid or that it was sick or that it was aggressive or that it's not normal for them to be out during the daytime. Coyotes, though, are actually naturally diurnal. Especially in rural areas, they're most active at dawn and dusk. And again, that's because the prey that they're hunting is out during the daytime. So it's actually perfectly natural to see coyotes out during the daytime, especially at dawn and dusk. Typically what happens is in urban areas, they become more nocturnal, and that's just to avoid us. But just seeing them out during the day, as long as they run away and look afraid of you, is nothing to be concerned about. However, sometimes coyotes living amongst us do become what we call habituated, and that means that they've lost that fear of people. And usually how this happens is because they learn that neighborhoods are a source of food or yards are a source of food, and they can come in and eat these things and nothing bad happens to them. So coyotes, again, are very smart, and they are constantly testing their environment and testing us. So similar to a smart dog or even a child, they're constantly testing us and seeing what they can get away with. So they might try, for instance, coming onto the outskirt of a community and eating out of a dumpster. If nothing bad happens to them then, the next time they might try coming into someone's yard and eating fruit that's fallen on the ground or barbecue scraps. If nothing bad happens then, they might try coming up onto someone's porch and eating the pet food that's outside on the porch. So they learn that, and we have actually taught them to be habituated without realizing it. So I won't ask anyone, I won't put anyone on the spot, those of you that said you've seen a coyote, but I wonder what you did. I'll reveal that the first time I saw a coyote before I knew any of this, I just watched. I watched the coyote. I thought, wow, this is really neat. I would have taken a picture if I had a camera with me at the time, but of course I didn't. But what was I teaching that coyote? I was teaching that coyote that humans are nothing to be afraid of. You know, he could be walking wherever he was walking at the time, and there's nothing to be concerned about. So every time that we see a coyote and we don't react, or worse yet, if we run away, we are teaching them that humans are not scary, and we are, we're making them lose that fear of people. The other thing that happens is that coyotes will share this knowledge and behavior that they have with other coyotes in their family group. So I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but something I hear quite commonly is that, first there was one coyote in our neighborhood I would see, and then there were two, and all of a sudden there were three, and coyotes are taking over our neighborhood now. What's going on? And the reason is that one coyote came in. He learned he could come up into someone's yard and eat pet food, and nothing bad happened. He went back and he shared this information with his pups and the rest of the coyotes in the family group. Usually there's one dominant coyote and the others will follow by example. So another one will come and try it, and another one. And this is how these sorts of patterns develop. And again, we have taught them this without realizing it. But the good news is we can reteach them through hazing, which I'll talk about later. So, the next most common conflict, it's not that common, but that people are concerned about are coyotes attacking pets. And again, coyotes normally don't bother pets. There's plenty of things for them to normally eat, but unattended pets are at risk. And by unattended, I'm referring to pets that are not on a leash, and there's not someone standing right next to them. So, for instance, if you just let your dog outside, even if you have a fence, and I'll talk more about fences in a moment, that would be an unattended pet. Or if you're walking through a park and your pet's not on a leash, that would be an unattended pet. These small unattended pets are at risk of coyote attack because they don't look any different to a coyote than another animal it would naturally be eating. So a coyote can't really tell the difference between a small dog or a small cat than it can between, for instance, a rabbit or a woodchuck. Because there's not a person there, they don't associate the two. So if you were standing there and your dog was on a leash, they should avoid your pet because you're there, and they should be afraid of you. But if if the cat is just running around outside unattended, they don't associate the two. So two important things from that is, number one, again, that unattended pets are at risk if you let them outside unattended. And number two is that an attack on an unattended pet does not mean that coyote is going to attack a person next. They're two completely different things. They don't associate these pets with people, so that does not mean that the next they're going to come attack a child, for instance. I mentioned this earlier. Attacks on larger dogs are much less common, but sometimes they do happen. When they happen, it's often two or three coyotes that do it, and it's for a territory-related reason. So again, sometimes that happens during breeding season. It's usually an off-leash dog that someone is walking through a coyote's territory. And if it's during breeding season, it's because they're territorial of their mate. It can happen sometimes if there's a denning site and a coyote is near their denning site and an off-leash dog comes by, they might view that dog as a threat too. So that's why it's so important just to make sure that your dog is on a leash, especially during this time of year. So in terms of, protecting your pets, it's all about taking a few, simple precautions that changing your behavior just a little bit to keep these sorts of things from happening. So again, the most important thing is always being with your pet when they're outside, having them on a leash, preferably a leash that's 6 feet long or less. If you have one of those retractable leashes and your dog is 20 or 30 feet away from you, a coyote might not even realize that dog is on a leash. It looks like an unattended pet to that coyote. Again, coyotes are active any time of day, so it's really not safe any time to let your pet outside unattended, but especially at night because that's when they're most active. If you see a coyote and you're walking your pet, if it's a small pet, I would advise picking it up and then putting the pet behind you so that the coyote's focused on you and not your pet. You can scare them away. If it's a larger dog, put them behind you. And then, I'm sure none of you would do this, but I always feel obligated to say, never let your dog play with the coyote. I do know some people that have done this in the past, and it looks innocent at first, but dogs don't understand coyote body language, and it can get aggressive pretty quickly. Okay, so just to recap, small dogs, it's especially important to accompany them outside. Always use a leash. Pick them up if you see a coyote. Larger dogs, be extra vigilant during breeding season. Use a leash. Don't allow them to play with a coyote. Okay, so with cats, unfortunately, the only 100% foolproof way to protect cats, not just from coyotes, but from other wildlife, from dogs, cars, disease, even mean-spirited people, is to always keep them inside. That is just, unfortunately, the truth. But if you want to allow your cat to go outside and enjoy the wonders of the outside, there are some things you can do. Everyone laughs at this one, but you can use a leash and a harness. I actually do this, and my neighbors think that I'm crazy, but I take my cat outside on a leash and harness. I don't try to walk them around, of course. Cats don't do that. But I take them outside, plop them in the grass. I know that they're safe. They can roll around, eat some grass, look at the birds, and I know that they're safe and nothing's going to happen to them. And I know the birds are safe. Or you could use something like this, a cat enclosure. My cats did not like this one, but some do. You know, I definitely would not leave your cat unattended in one of these. It's not coyote proof, but if you're outside with them, this is something that could work. Or my favorite, you can build a catio. I really want one of these. My husband will not allow it, but this is something fun where your cat can, you know, this is coyote proof. They can enjoy the outside, and they would really love this. If you have a cat and for whatever reason you can't keep them inside or use those other tips, or if you care for a feral cat colony, as I mentioned, you know, there's nothing you can do to protect them completely, but there are some ways you could help. The biggest one is to control pet food, you know, not to leave pet food outside all the time. So if it's a pet cat and you can feed them inside, that's the best thing. If it's a feral cat colony, the best thing to do is feed the cats just one time a day and then pick up the food immediately when they're done. And the cats will catch on pretty quickly that if they don't eat then, you know, that's it. So, you know, just making sure you don't have food attractants that attract coyotes into your yard in the first place, which will endanger the cats, is the most important. And then there are some things that you can do to protect cats further. You can make some cat posts that the cats can climb up, but the coyotes can't. Coyotes aren't climbers. They don't climb trees. So you could provide something like that, or a shelter, so you can give them some place to run to if a coyote comes. Okay, so again, in terms of protecting pets, the best protection is you being with them, them being on a leash. In terms of fences, coyotes can easily jump over any fence that's 6 feet tall or less. Well, 6 feet tall. If it's less than 6 feet tall, they can easily jump over it. So if you have a 4-foot chain link fence like I do, coyote can just jump right over that. If it is at least 6 feet tall, what they have to do is jump up onto the fence and push off. So there are things that you can do to the top of the fence, I'll show you some pictures here in a minute, that will keep them from doing that. Also, coyotes are ambush predators. They like to hide and pounce on things. So if you have a lot of thick brush around your house, that could provide potential hiding spots. So you might want to think about trimming up a little bit underneath or thinning it out so that you could see if there was a coyote there, if you have a small dog, for instance. You also want to look around and make sure that you don't have any of these types of attractants that would attract a coyote into your yard in the first place. And maybe, you know, nicely talk to your neighbors and let them know if they have some of these things that might be attracting coyotes in. There are some other things you could do that might help at night from keeping coyotes out of your yard. Motion-activated lights probably wouldn't work in the long term. Coyotes would probably learn pretty quickly that's not a threat. There are some motion-activated sprinklers called a scarecrow sprinkler that comes on and squirts water in a erratic pattern if they sense movement. That could work for a coyote. They work really well for deer or geese. They work better for that, but they could work for a coyote. You know, the best thing to do is for you to go out and scare them yourself, which I'll talk about later, but that could be something you could think about as well. Okay, so these are some pictures to illustrate a little bit about what I was talking about. So if you could imagine here that this was your yard or this was someone's yard, you see this fence here. It's just a 4-foot chain link fence. You know, that's not going to stop a coyote from coming into that person's yard whatsoever. And then you have all of this brush that could easily hide a coyote. So a lot of times when I hear of an instance where a small dog has been taken by a coyote, it often follows a similar type of pattern. Often it's someone that lets their dog outside every morning, let's say at 6 a.m. They go back inside and drink their coffee. They've been doing this for years and nothing has happened. And then all of a sudden one morning they let their dog outside as usual, and all of a sudden a coyote comes and takes the dog within a minute and is over the fence and gone. But they don't realize that that coyote has known they've been doing that for years probably. Coyotes are very, very smart. They learn our patterns. They know all of the pets in the neighborhood. They know if you take your pet on a walk every certain time of day. They know if you let your pet outside every night at 10 p.m. or every morning at 6 a.m. And for the most part, they use that information again to avoid us. But sometimes they can take advantage. So, for instance, this person here, they let their dog outside every morning at 6 a.m. They go back inside to have their coffee. The coyote could be waiting here, waiting for the dog to come out. Come take the dog, and it's all over in a minute. So, as opposed to this yard, it'd be a little bit of a different situation. Again, this fence is not going to deter a coyote whatsoever, but at least when this person lets their dog outside, they can see there's not a coyote waiting. But again, they hopefully will be out there accompanying their dog, in the morning to protect them from coyotes. So, you don't have to remove all of the vegetation in your yard. Of course, there are good reasons to have vegetation. But if you just trim up a little bit underneath or thin it out a little, that way you can see before you let your dog outside that there's not a coyote there. And then again, hopefully you're staying out there with them. This is I will admit, unattractive but inexpensive way to secure the top of your fence. So this would be a fence that's at least 6 feet tall. If it's at least 6 feet tall, if you put something like this on top of it, it'll keep the coyote from jumping up and pushing over like they have to do to get over that size of a fence. A better way and more attractive is what we call a coyote roller, and you can find this on coyoteroller.com. What it is, it's a very loosely rolling bar. The coyote tries to jump on and push off, and it gets rolled backward. So it also, if you have a dog that's an escape artist getting out of your fence, it would keep your dog in the fence too. It's actually what it was made for, and then they realized it works for this too. And it works really well. You can get it in a lot of different colors to match your fence. Depending on how big your price is, it can be pretty pricey, but you can make your own. Just get some PVC piping, roll it very loosely. You could paint it, to match your fence, and that would do the same thing. And again, the fence would have to be at least 6 feet tall for this to work. Okay, so, a lot of people, in addition to pet attacks, their biggest concern when they learn that coyotes are in their neighborhood is, are they going to attack people? Especially, are they going to attack my kids or my grandkids? And so one of the things that I did was to actually go and research every single case that I could find of a coyote biting a person from the early 1900s through now throughout the U.S. and Canada. And I only found an average of less than 10 incidents per year. So compared to the number of dog bites, which is almost 5 million just in the U.S., that's a very small number. So less than 10 throughout the U.S. and Canada. We also found that, most involve very minor injuries. Most involve just a single bite to an extremity, to a hand or a foot, or sometimes a hip. And most of the time that we could determine where there was information, we found that people were feeding the coyote. It could be purposely or unintentionally. They might have been leaving pet food outside. Or it could have been a neighbor that was doing it. Or it was pet related. So some of the incidents, for example, were someone came outside to discover a coyote was attacking their pet. They, tried to get their pet away and got bitten in the process. Some of the feeding related ones, some of them are very obvious. So one of the most obvious ones was a McDonald's drive-thru in Colorado. Their employees had been feeding a coyote French fries through the drive-in window. And one day, a customer pulled up to the window, and the coyote came up to her car, and she didn't know she was supposed to feed the coyote French fries, and he bit her. He came in the window and bit her. So that's a very obvious example. They're not always that obvious. There's other examples in Colorado and ski resorts. Where some tourists will see a coyote and think it's fun to feed them, and then those tourists leave and other tourists come, and the coyote comes up to them, and again, they don't realize they're supposed to feed them, and they get bitten. So a lot of times these bites on the hip or on the hand, we think that it's a coyote that has been fed. And again, it might not be that obvious. It might just be that they've learned that people leave out food. They learn that people have pet food or food outside, and they come up and get aggressive. Where's my food? So anytime that these situations happen, of course, we take them very seriously. The most important thing is to get as much information as we can about what was happening, what the person was doing, what the coyote was doing, so that we can prevent these from happening in the future, of course. But we also just want to keep in mind how rare they are. So you're more likely to be killed by a champagne cork or a golf ball than you are to be bitten by a coyote. So don't be too afraid. I also wanted to mention that we found that just as many adults were bitten as children. So a lot of times people think children are the primary victims. We did not find that to be the case. Okay, so in terms of kids, as I mentioned, kids are not more likely to be bitten than adults, but we do want to take some extra precautions with kids, of course, since they're smaller. We can teach kids what a coyote looks like, how they look different from a dog, but I think just a better approach, especially since kids are much more likely to be bitten by dogs, is just to teach kids to never approach or pet or feed any animal that looks like a dog. That's just the best way to protect them from both dogs and coyotes. So if they see a coyote, what they should do essentially is just to be big and loud, same thing that adults would do. The most important thing is they should never run away, and that's true for adults as well. So coyotes, just like most predators like bears, mountain lions, and wolves, if you run away from them, it can initiate that predatory chasing behavior, and they may start chasing you. And some attacks, some bites that we have seen have occurred for that reason. So it's very important that people don't run away. So kids should just be big and loud. They can yell for an adult. Hopefully there's one nearby. They can walk backwards slowly, but and most important that they don't run away. Okay, so if we already have these coyote conflicts going on, how do we tackle them? Well, we have learned through lots of trial and error in lots of communities tackling these situations that effective solutions have to have two parts. We have to change that problematic coyote behavior of coyotes, of course, but we also have to change some of our behaviors that are leading to these problematic coyotes. So in terms of what we can do, the most important thing is to look around our yards, look around our neighbors' yards, eliminate food attractants that might be attracting coyotes in, take some precautions with our pets, and then to also teach kids never feed an animal or approach an animal that they don't know. So it's pretty straightforward about what we need to do to help this situation. But how do we address the problematic coyotes? Well, the traditional way has been to remove them, whether that's on a large scale with a large bounty or trapping program, or if it's on a more select scale, just finding and removing problem coyotes. That's how we traditionally have approached that. There's relocating them, moving them somewhere else, or there's hazing, which is essentially a training tool for changing the behavior of problematic coyotes. So relocation often sounds like a great way to go because we don't want to kill the coyotes necessarily, but we also don't want them in our neighborhood. So it sounds like a good idea to round them up and move them somewhere else to this other ideal coyote habitat where they can live happily ever after. But unfortunately, that doesn't work for a variety of reasons. One is that coyotes are so incredibly territorial that wherever you put them, they are just going to do whatever they can to get back to their home range. And usually what happens is you drop them off somewhere, they're not familiar with where they are, they don't know the traffic patterns, they're very stressed, they often end up getting hit by a car in the process, or you've dumped them off in this ideal coyote habitat, and who's already there? Other coyotes. There's always going to be coyotes in ideal coyote habitat. So those coyotes that are there don't appreciate those new coyotes coming in, they get in scuffles, sometimes coyotes are killed in the process, or at least they're pushed out. In addition to that, it's not even a viable option. Even though rabies in coyotes is very rare, they are a rabies vector species, so you're not allowed by the state, or I think any state in the United States, to move them around in the state just because they are a rabies vector species. So it's not even a legal option to consider. But for the most part, the reason that some of us want this is because we view it as a more humane alternative to killing them. But it's really not more humane. It's actually less humane because these animals are very stressed and they often get killed anyway. So it's just a big waste of time and resources. So, what is often used, what has been traditionally been used, is to try to reduce the coyote population, with the theory being that if we reduce the coyote population, then we'll reduce the number of conflicts going on. But unfortunately, that doesn't work for a number of reasons, because it's almost impossible to reduce the coyote population. Our government's USDA Wildlife Services has been killing over 80,000 coyotes a year every year, I think since the 1800s, and we have more coyotes now than we ever did before, living in more areas than we ever did before. They're in every state except Hawaii, they're in every major US city, they're everywhere, and one of the reasons is because they are so great at repopulating. If you reduce the coyote population, they will respond by having more pups. They will have more pups. Also, remember, in a family group, there's only one female that's breeding. What happens is if you kill her, usually what happens is the other females will disperse, form their own groups, and start breeding. So you would have only had one female per group breeding. Now you might have 3 or 4 breeding. They're all having larger litters. They're breeding at an earlier age. Pretty quickly you can see how a lot of times we end up with communities that do this end up with more coyotes than they started with for all those reasons. Also, remember when you are removing coyotes, you are creating these vacant home ranges. And remember all those transient coyotes out there floating around looking for a home range? They're going to see the opening and they're going to come move right in. So it's pretty much impossible, and most wildlife biologists and managers have acknowledged that this method just does not work to solve conflicts. There's even been studies to try to document, how many coyotes do you have to remove before you can get to a place where you reduce the population. So in Colorado, they did a study. They took 92 coyotes. They put some of them in a group that they left alone. They put some of them in the unfortunate group where every year for 7 years they killed 61 to 75% of the coyotes. And then after that time, they stopped and waited to see what would happen. And within only 8 months, that population was back to where it had been 7 years ago. And that's because they doubled their litter sizes. Females started breeding earlier. Interestingly, they started having more female pups than male pups. Not quite sure how that one happened, but for all of those reasons, within 8 months. So if you can imagine, the resources and time that would be involved in trying to eliminate 75% of the coyotes here in St. Louis Park, and then within 8 months, and you did that for 7 years, and then within 8 months you were back up to where you started, I think there's probably a lot better things you could spend that money on here in the community. It wouldn't be a good return on your investment. So a better way to go is to just try to identify the particular coyotes that are causing a problem, the ones that are attacking pets or that are hanging around in yards that have become habituated, and just remove those coyotes. And that's a better way to go, and a lot of communities have tried this. The problem with that, one of the problems though, is that it's very, very difficult to catch a coyote. A lot of times in urban and suburban areas, shooting coyotes is not safe. It's not something that you can do. And even then, it's so hard to find a coyote. As I mentioned, I was out there knowing where they all were, and I still didn't see one. So trapping, though, is often what's used. And coyotes are so smart that it's very hard to get them to step into a trap. They're very, very wary of human scent. They're very smart. For every trap that's set out, probably dozens of raccoons and possums, probably even some domestic pets will get caught in a trap before a coyote is ever caught. And that's just any coyote, not specifically the one that's causing the problems that you're looking for. So there are some skilled trappers out there that can do this, but they'll typically spend several weeks and charge thousands of dollars to do it. And what they'll do is they'll set up trail cameras to identify the particular coyote, learn what his patterns are, learn where he goes, pre-bait the trap, make sure they talk to homeowners and make sure they don't have their pets outside at the time so they're going in the trap. They'll do all of that, and they might be successful in catching that coyote or that group of coyotes. But then what happens? So you've emptied up this home range. It's going to be filled by more coyotes. And, again, you might have more population growth. But most importantly, you haven't addressed the reason why you had that problem coyote in the first place. So, the vast majority of coyotes out there are not causing a problem. At one point when the Chicago area had collared 600 coyotes, only one of them had ever attacked a pet. So 599 of them were not out there causing problems. So anytime we have a problem coyote, there's always a reason why. And it's pretty much always because there's food outside that's attracting them, or there's pets running around outside unattended. So if we don't address those problems, these new coyotes coming in could very well keep having the same problems. So, we're not changing our behaviors in this situation, but even more importantly, we're not teaching the coyotes anything. So when you trap a coyote and you remove them from the population, that coyote is dead and hasn't learned anything, but also that coyote's family group hasn't learned anything. Like I mentioned before, they teach each other things, and when a coyote has been killed and is gone in a trap, the other coyotes don't know why. They don't know why their coyote friend was killed in a trap. They don't know that it was because it attacked a pet or because it was eating pet food in someone's yard. They don't know that. So it doesn't teach them anything. Okay, so this brings us to hazing, which is another method, a more innovative, fairly newer method of changing the behavior of problematic coyotes. So essentially what we're doing is just reestablishing that natural fear of people that they naturally have. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. Essentially, when you see a coyote, I want you to look big and scary and loud. And the easiest way to do it is just to yell and wave your arms. Just to go away, coyote. Just yell at them, look at them, and wave your arms. That's the easiest thing to do. You might look a little silly, but you don't need any tools. That's the easiest way. But there are lots of ways. Another great way is to carry a whistle. This is a whistle from a sporting goods store that is a rescue whistle. It's extra loud, but any whistle will do. You can carry it around your neck if you're walking your dog and you see a coyote sometimes when you walk your dog, and just take this with you so you have it. And if you see the coyote, blow the whistle at them. My personal favorite is the air horn. It's little enough to go in your pocket. If you see a coyote, you can blow this at them. This will definitely scare them away, or you can also have fun with it other ways. This, you can also make your own hazing tools. This is just a sippy cup with pennies in it. If you don't have sippy cups laying around, this was at the dollar store. And it's actually pretty loud. It has a nice loud noise to it, and it was very inexpensive. Umbrellas work really well. Just for some reason, just the opening and closing of umbrellas are very scary to coyotes. That works really well. Water works really well. If you're in your garden and you see a coyote, turn the hose on him. That'll get him to run away. Even better and more fun is if you have super soakers, or your kids or your grandkids have super soakers, borrow one from them, and then you can get a coyote from a long range away. You can just be standing on your porch and haze a coyote. That works really well. You can even put a little bit of vinegar in the water, and that makes the extra punch because they don't like the smell. You can bang pots and pans, you can throw things. There's almost an unlimited amount of ways that you can haze a coyote. And the other beautiful part about it is that everybody can do it. You don't need to be an animal control officer or wildlife biologist or a coyote whisperer. Every single person in this room can haze a coyote, and every person in this room should haze a coyote. The other great part about hazing is that by hazing one coyote, you are reaching the whole family group. So again, they communicate to each other. So for instance, if a coyote comes into your yard and you blow an air horn at him, just like a coyote that learns there's pet food in a yard and goes and tells their friends, they'll do the same thing with the air horn. They'll go back and say, hey, let's not go in Bob's yard anymore because there's some scary thing going on there. And the other coyotes will learn and they won't do it. Same thing with their pups. So when you're hazing one coyote, you're teaching the whole group, and you are teaching the coyotes that are already there how to abide by your rules. So rather than continually trapping coyotes and moving them out, and continuing to have this influx of coyotes coming in, you're just teaching the ones that are already here. And you're saving yourself a lot of work and frustration in the long run, teaching them how to abide by our rules. So just another few ways to look at it. Again, reestablishing their natural fear of people. Also, we're marking our territory in a way that they understand. So again, when you hear them howling, they are howling to other coyotes that this is their territory and they should stay out of it. So when you're in your yard and you're blowing your air horn, or a megaphone, this is also great, I love that one, you are doing the same thing essentially, and they understand that. So again, any of these methods work great, but it's also important that you never ignore a coyote. So, if everybody on this side of the room goes out and starts hazing coyotes, and everybody over here says, this was the dumbest thing I ever heard, I'm not doing this, then you're going to cancel out the great work of these people over here. Everybody needs to do it. That way they'll more quickly learn that people are something to avoid. And again, you never want to run, especially from a coyote. So, again, anybody can do this. There are almost unlimited possibilities of how to do it. There are just a few simple rules that you have to follow to do it correctly. So the biggest one is you have to have a connection with the coyote for it to work. They have to see you, and they have to know that whatever you're doing is directed towards them. So, for instance, there were some great animal control officers in California that decided to use paintball guns to haze coyotes, but they hid behind bushes and trees while they did it. So the coyotes didn't know where the paintballs were coming from that they were getting hit by. So that didn't work. They need to see you and know where it's coming from. Also, a lot of people try honking at a coyote if they drive by in the car. That doesn't work for a couple of reasons. Number one, they hear traffic noise all the time. They hear people honking at each other all the time, so they're very used to that. And number two, they don't associate that with you, they associate it with a car. Also, if you're in your house and you're leaning out the window on the third floor yelling at a coyote, that probably won't work. They need to very directly know that it's coming from you. If you see a coyote and you're with a small child or a small pet, again, you should pick them up and put them behind you. That way you can focus the coyote's attention on you, so you can haze them and scare them away. If it's a larger pet or child, still put them behind you. Now, this is the one where a lot of well-meaning people who have tried to haze have gone wrong without realizing it. It's very important that when you haze a coyote, you continue to do it until they run away. Again, as I mentioned, coyotes are very smart and they're always testing us. So a habituated coyote will very commonly react in one of two ways when it's been hazed for the very first time. They will often either just stand there and look at you, or they might run away 10 to 20 feet and stand there and look at you. And again, that's because they're testing us, trying to figure out what we're doing and what's going to happen. So if you haze a coyote, you're yelling and blowing your whistle, and they're just standing there looking at you, or they run away a little bit and stop and look at you, if you decide at that point, well, that didn't work, and you just walk away and go back in your house, or if you say, yay, I'm done, I did it, and you walk away, all you have taught that coyote is that it just has to wait for a moment, and then you'll leave, and it can go right back to doing whatever it was doing before. That's what you've taught them. So it's very important to continue and intensify your hazing until they run away. So the easiest way to do this, and I know not everyone will want to do this, and that's okay, but the easiest way is actually to run towards the coyote a bit while you're yelling and waving your arms. The whole reason that hazing works is that for coyotes is because their first response when faced with a threat is to run away. Their response is not to fight back, they're going to run away. So I've never heard of an instance where a coyote has charged a person because they hazed them or ran towards them. So that's the easiest way, but you don't have to do it that way. Just essentially get louder. You can jump up and down and blow your whistle. You can start throwing things. If there's other people nearby, get them to help. But just keep doing it until the coyote runs away. Okay, so a lot of people ask me what's the best method. Is a whistle better or a squirt gun? That really doesn't matter. Pick your favorite tool, or better yet, a couple tools. The most important thing is that we just don't want everybody doing the same thing. So if everybody in St. Louis Park starts blowing whistles at coyotes all the time, they might start to learn that that's not really a threat. So we do want to use a little bit of a variety. But even more important is having a variety of people doing the hazing. So that's the reason why I didn't just go and talk to police officers today, that I'm here with you tonight, because if we decided, for instance, we're just going to have the police officers do this, they're going to be the ones that haze coyotes. Coyotes are going to learn very quickly what the police officer's uniform looks like, what their car looks like, and before they can even get out of the car, the coyotes are going to be gone. They'll very quickly learn to be afraid of police officers, but not you and me and everyone else that has seen coyotes here. So that's why we want coyotes to be afraid of all of us. You are the ones that see coyotes. We want them to be afraid of you. We want them to know that you are the ones that are scary and they should stay away from. At the same time, if you try to call a police officer, by the time they get there, 99 times out of 100, that coyote will be gone by the time they get there. So that's why it's best, if everyone helps out, and does this. And the more people that get involved, the more quickly coyotes learn that to stay away from people. Okay, so this one goes back to the first rule. You only want to use these noisemakers or hazing methods when you actually see the coyote. And that seems obvious, but if, for example, you decide you're going to take your whistle and you're going to take it with you every time you walk your dog, and you're going to blow it when you see the coyote, that's great. But if you decide, well, I often see a coyote at this certain spot, so just to be safe, I'm going to blow the whistle every time I walk past this spot, whether I see a coyote or not, that's not what you want to do, because that'll just habituate the coyote to the whistle, only when you see the coyote. And finally, this might sound like a lot of work, but never fear, only 2 to 3 times per coyote or per the whole group, since again, they communicate with each other, is really all that you need to haze a coyote and send them the message and keep them away. In the rare event that you do see more than one coyote together, you would haze them in exactly the same way. There is always going to be one dominant coyote that will respond first and run away, and the others will follow. Okay, so again, this is all based on the fact that coyotes will run away when they're faced with a threat. So, there are just a couple tips and precautions based on that. You never want to haze a very obviously sick or injured coyote that can't get up and run away. That's when you want to call the police officers and let them know, and they'll handle it. You also want to make sure that they have an escape route. You don't want to haze them into a corner where they can't run away. You want to make sure they have somewhere to run to. And in terms of children, very young children the only thing that I would not recommend them do is to run towards a coyote, but everything else they can do. They can use the noisemakers, but just that was the only thing I wouldn't advise there. Okay, so I want to talk just for a few moments, about a very successful program in Denver, Colorado that really based their approach on hazing and how they did it and how it worked. So back in 2008, they were having a lot of conflicts, more than you're having here. A lot of sightings, also attacks on dogs, including large dogs. A person that was bitten, 15 throughout the state of Colorado. And they had, hired someone to come in and trap coyotes several times. They'd gone through that cycle several times, and they just kept ending up in the same place of having these conflicts. And so they decided instead they were going to come up with a new way of doing this, a new plan. And it focused on 3 parts. The first part was monitoring and collecting data. They established a hotline people could call and report coyote sightings in a website form. They put a lot of emphasis on education, holding meetings for the public, going to neighborhoods where people were having conflicts with coyotes and holding little neighborhood meetings. They did a lot of signs, literature, that sort of thing. And they used hazing as their principal way of addressing problematic coyotes. So if they had a coyote that attacked a pet or was habituated, they would use hazing to address that. And they had a lot of success. They did not trap or remove any coyotes. They did all of this with hazing and education. They had no more attacks on people, a significant reduction in pet attacks. It was actually so effective that they started getting angry phone calls from people wanting to know what they did with all the coyotes. They thought that they had removed them or moved them in some way. And the truth is, they were still there. When we're hazing coyotes, we're not moving them to the next city or the next county over. They're still going to have their same home range. They're just going to adjust their behavior. Often what they'll do is they'll become more nocturnal, or they'll spend more time in those little patches of natural areas. So basically, they'll just avoid us. It's just a graph showing, how those conflicts decreased. And so I want to go now through a few examples of how they used hazing in real life situations. So one of these was a park. It was called Bible Park. You probably have a park like this that you go to. It's a place where people went to go jogging, to have picnics, to walk their dogs. It's a pretty popular park. And they had a family group of coyotes that was just lounging in the park like this coyote in plain view of people, clearly not afraid of people, not running away. This family group was attacking pets, including large dogs. I think even some dogs that were on leashes. They were following people. Joggers were being followed by coyotes. Some pretty serious coyote conflicts going on here. And this is a situation where a lot of communities would shut down the park and set out traps to trap coyotes. And they had done this before in Denver. And they decided, we want to try something new because that really hasn't been working for us. So they sent out their park staff to haze the coyotes. They went out every morning for 3 weeks with a variety of tools, pots and pans, air horns, whistles, all those sorts of things. And after that 3-week period, to this day still, this was in 2009, they have not had any more instances of dog attacks in the park. The coyotes aren't lounging in the park. People aren't seeing them anymore. All of this aggressive behavior has stopped. And this is actually where those angry phone calls were coming from, because there were park goers that liked seeing the coyotes, and they were calling and angrily asking, what'd you do with all the coyotes in the park? And they're still there. The park staff see them in the early morning hours hunting for rodents, but the park goers are not seeing them, which is how it should be. Okay, this is an example of just a regular citizen, could be any one of you here tonight, who came to one of these neighborhood hazing training sessions because he had a small dog and he had seen a coyote in the neighborhood and he was afraid to let his dog outside because there had been some pet attacks in the area. And so he attended one of these workshops, and he went home one evening after he attended the workshop. He was going to let his small dog outside. It was at night. But he opened up his door and looked out first, and he saw a coyote across the street in his neighbor's driveway. So he said, okay, I will try this hazing thing. So we opened up his front door, stepped onto his porch, started yelling and waving his arms, go away, coyote. And the coyote just looked at him. And he remembered, okay, they told me about this. This is the part where I have to intensify my hazing. So he kept yelling and waving his arms, and he ran towards the coyote, and he actually got within 6 feet of the coyote before the coyote took off and ran away. But then he ran away. The next time the man saw the coyote, a few evenings later, he opened up his front door, stepped onto his front porch, started yelling and waving his arms. This time, as soon as he started yelling and waving his arms, the coyote took off and ran away. The third time he saw the coyote, all he did was open up his front door, and the coyote took off and ran away. And that was the last time that he saw the coyote, or any coyote, in his neighborhood. And that's a pretty typical story that we hear. The first time, it took some more effort. It's not common that we hear that people have to run within 6 feet of the coyote. And again, he didn't have to do that. He could have intensified in another way. But the second time, it was easier. The third time, almost no effort at all. And that's all it took for that coyote to stop hanging around that neighborhood. This is an example of a school. This is also in the Denver area where coyotes had been seen hanging around. And, I don't think that there's much more alarming to parents than when they find out there's coyotes hanging around a school or a play yard, because it looks like the coyotes are there looking to attack their children. This sort of thing was going on. There were coyotes that were actually waiting outside the fence at recess, looking in the fence at recess while kids were playing. They were seen along the pathways of school in the morning. Again, this is a situation where a lot of communities would maybe shut down the school for a couple of days, put out traps. But they didn't do that. They decided, first of all, to do some reconnaissance work. They talked to the kids, they talked to the school staff, and the first thing they found out was that the kids had been feeding the coyotes through the fence at recess. So that explains why the coyotes were waiting through the fence. So, of course, the first thing they did was put a stop to that. They put a stop to that, and they taught the kids, that these are coyotes. They taught them about them, taught them why they shouldn't feed them. They talked to the school staff. Then they also got the parents in the neighborhood involved, and they went out and started hazing these coyotes. This also was in 2009. This was successful. They haven't had any problems since. So, just in summary, those of you that saw a coyote, when you see a coyote again, if you do, what are you going to do? Well, remember, first of all, that if it's during the daytime, it's not necessarily abnormal to see a coyote during the daytime. It doesn't automatically mean that it's sick or aggressive, but they should run away from you. If they don't, again, you want to put yourself in between a pet or a child, and then you want to haze them. Use any of these methods that we talked about. Also, again, anytime you do see this kind of situation, you always want to stop and think, why is this? Do I possibly have something in my yard that's attracting coyotes? Do my neighbors possibly have something in their yards that are attracting coyotes? Nicely talk to your neighbors and let them know. Let them know also about how to haze so they can help too. Again, if you're the only one in the neighborhood hazing and everybody else is just standing there looking at coyotes, you're going to have a lot more work to do. So, get your neighbors involved. Again, if you learn nothing else from this is the most important thing, is that we make sure we're not feeding coyotes intentionally or unintentionally. And, to prevent coyote conflicts, again, we need to eliminate food attractants, take precautions with our pets, teach kids what to do if they see a coyote. We need to change coyote behavior, and hazing is the best way we found, and we all have to work together. We all have to be involved in this. It can't, again, just be police officers or wildlife biologists. This really works the best if everybody does it. So at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, either at the podium or raise your hand, and the chief will come around, and happy to answer any questions that you have. I have a question here. Oh, no? Change your mind? Oh, there's a question here.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering what the average lifespan is for a coyote.
Oh, sure. So in captivity, they can live similar to the lifespan of a large domestic dog. They can live 12 to 15 years. But in urban areas, we found the average lifespan is only about 3. And the biggest source of mortality is traffic and then disease.
How much variation is there in the color of the coat? Any chance of one being very dark, nearly black, and about the size of a German Shepherd?
There is. So they can look the size of a German Shepherd, but usually they actually weigh much less. They just have bulkier coats. But yes, I was just recently in Wisconsin, in Bayside, Wisconsin, and they told me they have black ones and white ones, and it's pretty rare. Typically, their coat is typically very similar to this, a little bit of reddish, but yes, there can be different colors, and there also can be crosses between coyotes and dogs. It's not very common for a couple reasons. One, the mating seasons are different, and if there is a mating between a coyote and a dog, the dog, especially if it's a male dog, doesn't help out and raise the pups, so often the pups don't survive. So it's not very common, but it can happen sometimes.
You mentioned that they can be a vector for rabies. Any reported cases of rabies transmission?
In here?
In Minnesota or in the U.S.?
Transmission to
Humans?
No, because anytime that someone is bitten by a coyote, they automatically have to go to the hospital and get the shots. So no, there's never been a case of a person getting rabies from coyote. So in terms of, I don't know if I mentioned this, in terms of the number of attacks on people by rabid coyotes, there have been a handful, maybe 7 or 8 cases out of 180 where rabid coyotes have bitten people. But again, the people got the shot, so they didn't get it. So that's the difference between wolves, for example. Most attacks on people by wolves are from rabid wolves or otherwise diseased wolves. But with coyotes, it's actually usually healthy coyotes that bite people, but they just have become habituated due to food.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
So we have in this area a trail that's an old railroad bed that is used by walkers and bikers and people with their dogs. And some of us with sort of medium to large size dogs like to let them run free along that area because it's, that's what dogs like to do, like coyotes, and there aren't too many people down there. Are we being irresponsible in doing that? I mean, I know there are probably many opinions on that in the room, but those of us who feel sort of generally good about it, now that we are more informed about coyotes.
Yeah. I mean, I would advise against it for all the reasons that I recommended, but especially during the breeding season. If it's a larger dog, that maybe if you are only going to sort of do it at a certain time, especially that time of the year, would be extra cautious. Put them on a leash.
That makes sense. So
and carry hazing tools with you. Hopefully you're not too far away from your dog. So if you do see a coyote situation happens, at least you have something to try to scare them away too.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Again, that was a great presentation. I have a slightly different question for you. It's not coyotes specifically.
Okay.
But in these neighborhoods, there's a lot of deer also. And I'm just really interested if you have an opinion on some of the things you've been talking about removal methods, breeding as the population is reduced, methods to control them, to live in some kind of harmony or concert with the deer, attractants. I mean, are there many parallels to the coyote situation and the presentation that would also relate to deer in urban environments?
Yeah, I had to be up here for another hour answering all the different parts of your question. In terms of lethal control of deer, that's very similar. Yes, if you lethally control deer, the responding deer will end up having more fawns, often having twins. At the same time, when you remove deer, migrating deer will come in from other areas. So typically what we see, lethal control programs don't actually end up reducing deer populations very much, but also the conflicts that people have with deer don't seem to be density dependent. So traffic mortality, people that are hit deers with traffic, we haven't found that reducing deer populations addresses that issue. What's more effective is reducing speed limits. Lyme disease, there's not a connection there. Gardens, for instance, better ways are to put up fencing or use repellents. So I can talk to you more about that. Most people didn't come here for deer, but we also work on a method of birth control for deer that we also have been working on that we've found to be effective. But anyway, I can talk to you more about that later if you want. Other coyote questions?
I noticed in looking at reports of sightings in the metropolitan area, particularly the Twin Cities, on that basis, it appears there's a variation in the densities. Now, that's just kind of a crude way of looking at, where they all are. Mm-hmm. But presuming that the area pretty much has the same information source of a problem, is there a variation in density?
I'm sure there is. Coyote home ranges vary greatly. In urban areas, they're often maybe 2 to 5 square miles, but they can be up to 20 square miles. It depends on how many resources there are. In very densely urban areas, they often have larger home ranges because they need more areas to find the food that they need. So, yeah, that's one of the reasons why I always get the question, how many coyotes are there here, wherever I am at the time, and no one ever has the answer for that because it's just, first of all, so hard. It's not like you can fly in a helicopter and count them. It's very hard to see them, and then you can't just apply a certain rule to, there's X coyotes per certain area, and it's very hard. So yes, to answer your question, there's varying densities, but we don't know what they are. But it is safe to say that coyotes are everywhere. That's the only thing I can say with certainty.
Two questions. If you've seen a coyote in a certain place, can you expect to see it again?
Maybe.
Maybe. They aren't just hanging around. They have a pattern or a.
Yeah, they absolutely have a pattern. So, it's hard to answer your question because if, for instance, someone saw them and scared them away, you might never see them again. Right. But a lot of times when people see coyotes, they're just kind of trotting along, going from one part of their home range to the next. And some people, if they're out late at night, they have a night shift, they might see that every night at 3 a.m. So, possibly.
And then are there natural, do coyotes have natural, what's the word I'm looking for? Predators?
In urban areas, no. In more rural areas, the mountain lions, wolves, they will kill coyotes, but really, or bears sometimes. But here, their biggest source of mortality again is traffic. And then when we start to get large coyote populations, what we often see is an outbreak of mange or other diseases, and that's kind of a natural way of keeping the population down is disease more often than predators.
I see.
It's funny you should mention mange because I was just going to ask about that because we actually had a dog in our neighborhood that recently came down with mange and was told by their vet that he probably got it from either the fox or coyote populations in the area. Is that an accurate thing to have happened?
I have heard a couple of times someone saying that is the case, but and mange is easily curable. It's 3 weeks of doses. Just let people know in case they're alarmed. But I don't hear of that happening commonly at all. But it's possible. So I'm not going to say that vet was incorrect, but it's possible. Yeah.
I have a question about dog parks. I'm wondering if, because of the activity of so many dogs in a dog park and the way dogs mark the area, will a coyote avoid that area, or is that another opportunistic spot?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's come up a few times before. I will say I've never heard of an incident at a dog park. I think typically you're right. There's so much commotion and so many people around that it's not something that would attract a coyote. Now, that's not to say if you're, I think dog parks have hours, but that's not to say if you're out there in the middle of the night with your one dog that something couldn't happen. But I think in general, there's enough people and human activity that they don't tend to bother them. But again, that'd be a good place to have signs and let people know how to haze, and have that information available.
I'm guessing also not to feed your dogs in the dog
Well,
park where there might be,
yeah, I would.
remaining dog food out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can give them a treat, but I wouldn't lay food down and leave. Yeah, of course. Thank you. I think there's a question over here. Oh, no? Okay. One back there.
As long as it looks like most of the big questions have been asked, you mentioned birth control for deer, and I know that that's something that the city of St. Paul has done with actually their pigeon population.
Yeah,
They have
okay.
put feeders out
Great.
that have birth control in the feed, and I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about maybe what experiments are going on with trying that with coyotes.
With coyotes, there really aren't any. There's been some experiments with sterilizing them, but of course that brings up the whole problem of catching them in the first place, which is very difficult. I think that's something that will be more researched and looked into in the future. But right now, there aren't any studies or anyone that I know of doing remote delivery, darting. For instance, with deer, we do remote delivery. We dart them with an immunocontraception that allows them, keeps them from getting pregnant and having birth. There's nothing like that for coyotes. And the what we use for deer, which can also be used for some other species, don't work with canines. So right now there aren't any, but I think in the future we'll probably see that.
Hi, I'm just wondering, something you didn't talk about is why there are more coyotes. It sounds like there have always been coyotes in the area, but I think I had read something about that we're kind of taking, the suburbs are moving out, we're taking over their areas, and so they're moving to where the food is plentiful. Is that true?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is actually the extirpation of wolves. As wolves have been pushed out of the area, coyotes have had an opportunity to come in. Where wolves are abundant, coyote populations are lower. So that's one thing. Another thing is, the greater amount of land that we develop, the less habitat there is for coyotes. So they have learned they have less opportunity out there. So they have learned that urban areas are a place for them to be. But also, the populations have expanded. As I mentioned, they started out in the central part of the U.S. and they've moved all throughout the country. So they are still somewhat becoming established here. But in addition to that, I think when we're actually physically seeing more coyotes, it's not really a matter of how many coyotes there are in the population, because again, we don't see most of them. It's just a matter of certain coyotes becoming habituated. So I think that most of the time is what we're dealing with. It's not that there are so many more coyotes, it's just that the ones that are here have lost their fear of people. You just keep raising your arm and confusing me. Okay.
Thank you. Do the coyotes in our area, I don't know if you know this, have can they get canine distemper? I know the raccoons sometimes in St. Louis Park have that.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering if you know whether...
I don't know about this area. Do you know the answer to that? Okay. But it's possible, but of course it's just important to keep your dogs vaccinated for that. Any other questions? Well, if anyone has any lingering questions, I'll be up here. You can feel free to come up here. I also have cards up here if you'd like to take one. Contact me anytime. I always say this, and most people don't, but I would love to hear if you haze a coyote, even if it doesn't go right, it doesn't work. I'd love to hear about it and help you or keep that in my file of stories about hazing. So, so with that, and thank you so much. I hope this was helpful for you, and thanks for coming.